The day had started like any other at the small car dealership. The morning sun was just beginning to spill through the glass windows, making the cars parked outside shine as if they were brand new, even though most of them had been there for months. The salesmen were arranging paperwork and polishing the cars, chatting casually with each other. There was an air of routine, the usual mix of excitement for big sales and quiet boredom when the lot was slow. Then, the door opened and a man stepped in. At first glance, he looked like any ordinary customer. He was dressed simply jeans, a plain shirt, and a light jacket. There was nothing flashy, nothing that screamed celebrity, but the way he carried himself was calm, quiet, almost careful. As if he didn't want to draw attention, one of the salesmen, who prided himself on being able to spot serious buyers from a mile away, immediately noticed him. But instead of seeing a potential customer, the salesman saw someone who looked too ordinary, maybe even a little out of place. He smirked slightly and walked over, thinking this would be an easy moment to assert his superiority. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, a little too sharply. His tone was polite on the surface, but the edge in his voice made it clear he didn't think much of this man. The man nodded politely. "Yes, I'm just looking around. I want to see a few cars," he said quietly. There was nothing flashy in his voice, nothing that demanded attention, but there was a calm confidence in the way he spoke. The salesman barely looked at him. He waved toward the older cars on the lot. "Those are your best options," he said with a hint of mockery. "They're cheap, reliable. At least for someone like you." His laugh was quiet, but it carried a tone meant to humiliate. Just enough for anyone watching to notice. The man didn't respond with anger or embarrassment. He just nodded again, smiled faintly, and walked slowly toward the cars the salesman had pointed out. Every step he took was deliberate, unhurried. There was something about the way he moved that made it clear he wasn't fazed by the salesman's words. He wasn't rushing to prove himself. He wasn't trying to fight back. He was simply being himself. A few other customers in the dealership noticed the interaction. Some exchanged glances, sensing that the salesman was being unfair. A young couple browsing the lot whispered quietly to each other. "Why is he being so rude?" one of them asked. But the salesman didn't notice. They were just background noise to him. People who would either buy something or leave. Meanwhile, the man quietly inspected the cars. He opened doors, checked the interiors, looked under the hood. He asked the mechanic some simple questions any regular person might ask, about mileage, maintenance, and fuel efficiency. Every question was polite, every action calm and careful. It was clear he wasn't here to impress anyone, and he certainly wasn't here to argue. The salesman watched from a distance, his smirk fading slowly as he realized this man didn't react the way most people did. Usually, customers would be embarrassed or intimidated, maybe even angry when treated like this. But this man, he was unaffected. He didn't need the salesman's approval, and he didn't let the attitude get to him. As the man moved from car to car, a few more staff members began to notice him. One of the younger mechanics paused what he was doing, unsure if he should say something. He had recognized the man instantly. He knew who he was, had seen him on the screen many times, yet here he was in a simple jacket, quietly looking at cars, blending in completely. But the mechanic stayed quiet, not wanting to make it obvious. The salesman, still unaware, continued to throw small comments. "That one's too old. You probably can't handle it anyway," he muttered, thinking no one was listening. But now the man finally looked up. He gave a small, polite smile, just enough to acknowledge the comment, but he didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He simply continued looking at the cars, calm, patient, and quiet. There was something about the way he handled himself that started to draw the attention of other customers in the dealership. People began to whisper to each other. "Did you hear what he just said?" someone asked. "He didn't even get upset." Another person nodded. "Yeah, he's just calm. Completely calm." The salesman felt a strange shift. He had expected the man to react like everyone else, to show embarrassment or anger, but instead, the calmness made the salesman uncomfortable. He didn't know how to respond. Usually he was in control, the one setting the tone. But here, His usual tactics of judgment and mockery didn't work. The man finally walked over to one of the older sedans, opened the door, and inspected it carefully. He ran his hand over the dashboard, leaned down to see the engine, and even checked the tires. Every action was slow, intentional, and respectful, not just of the car, but of the process. He treated the place as if it mattered, not as if he was there to prove something. By now, a small crowd of customers had gathered around, quietly watching. Some were curious, some were impressed, and some were just trying to see what was happening. Everyone could feel the tension in the air, though none of them could explain why. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but there was a quiet, growing sense that something important was unfolding. The salesman finally realized he might have underestimated this man. He tried to regain control. "Well, if you're done looking, maybe I can show you something newer." "Something better," he said, trying to sound professional. But his voice had lost the confidence it had started with. The man looked at him, still calm, and said softly, "I'll think about it." "Thank you." Then he walked back toward another car, continuing his careful inspection. At that moment, it was clear to everyone watching that the man didn't need to be flashy or loud to command respect. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't demand attention. And yet everyone in the room felt his presence. The day at the dealership had started like any other. But now, slowly, it was becoming a day that people would remember. The quiet hum of the dealership was slowly giving way to a more uncomfortable energy. The salesman, who had been confident in his judgment at first, was starting to feel uneasy. Every glance he cast toward the man in the simple jacket reminded him that something wasn't going according to plan. He had expected embarrassment or frustration, something he could use to assert authority, but instead there was calm. Complete calm. It made him uncomfortable in a way he wasn't used to. The man continued walking around the lot with deliberate steps, stopping at each car as if he had all the time in the world. He leaned down to check the tires of a sleek black sedan, carefully inspecting the tread, running his fingers lightly over the rubber. Then he opened the driver's door, glanced at the dashboard, and examined the interior. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. Yet, even in this quiet examination, there was an air of presence. A subtle way of holding the room's attention without demanding it. The salesman decided to step up his game, hoping to regain control. He straightened his posture and cleared his throat loudly enough for the man to hear. "That car's not going to be worth your money," he said with a smug tone. "It's old and it's been on the lot for a long time. Probably better to look elsewhere unless you want something that's falling apart." The man looked up, met his eyes, and gave a polite smile. "Thank you for letting me know," he said softly. "I just like to see things for myself. Sometimes old cars have character and they tell a story." His calm, unassuming words made the salesman feel even more frustrated. He had expected irritation or argument, not this quiet composure. Meanwhile, a few customers who had been watching from a distance started whispering among themselves. "Who is he?" one asked. "He seems different. Not like anyone I've seen treated like this before." Another shook their head. "He's calm, but there's something about him that makes you respect him, even if you don't know why." The energy in the room was shifting subtly. The presence of this quiet, composed man was drawing attention. Even without him trying, the salesman, feeling challenged, tried another tactic. He motioned toward the older cars on the edge of the lot. "Those over there might be more your speed," he said, with a tone that was supposed to be helpful, but came off as condescending. "Not too fancy, not too expensive? You wouldn't want to stretch yourself too thin, right?" He laughed quietly to himself, assuming the man would feel embarrassed or insulted, but the man didn't react in the way the salesman expected. Instead, he nodded politely and walked over to the cars. He ran his hand over the hood of a slightly dented sedan, inspecting it carefully. Then he crouched down to look under the car, checking the exhaust and the undercarriage. Every move was intentional, as if he were genuinely interested in learning about the car. Rather than proving anything, the salesman's smirk began to fade. He had built his confidence on belittling others, on making them feel small so he could feel bigger. But this man, standing quietly among the cars, wasn't affected. He wasn't trying to impress, he wasn't trying to compete, and he certainly wasn't showing fear. The realization hit the salesman slowly. This was a situation he couldn't dominate with arrogance or attitude. Few of the younger staff members began to exchange subtle glances. They were trying not to draw attention, but they couldn't help noticing that something unusual was happening. The calm demeanor of the man in the jacket seemed to have a quiet authority, one that didn't come from words or gestures, but simply from the way he carried himself. The man moved to another car, a slightly older model with a few scratches on the side. He opened the driver's door and carefully slid into the seat. He tested the steering wheel, checked the mirrors, and leaned down to see under the dashboard. Then he got out and examined the engine with patient attention. It was clear that he wasn't in a rush. He wasn't here to be noticed. And yet, everyone in the dealership was noticing him. The salesman, growing more agitated, muttered under his breath, "Who even is this guy? Why isn't he reacting like everyone else?" He took a step closer, trying to assert some authority, but the man didn't even look at him. He continued moving calmly from car to car, thoughtful in every action, and something unexpected happened. A family entered the dealership, and the moment they saw the man, their eyes widened. The children whispered excitedly to their parents, and the parents approached him with polite smiles. "Excuse me, sir," one of them said. "Would it be okay if we took a picture with you?" The salesman froze. His eyes widened as he finally realized who the man was. For the first time that day, his smug confidence vanished entirely. The face he had been mocking, the quiet, ordinary-looking man, was someone famous. Someone millions of people recognized instantly. He had been treating a celebrity as if he were just another customer, without realizing it. The man smiled gently at the family. "Of course," he said kindly. He knelt slightly so the children could stand in front of him, and he let them take their photo. He didn't demand attention or make a scene. He simply allowed the family to have a moment. Quietly patient and gracious, the atmosphere in the dealership shifted dramatically. Staff members whispered to each other, customers turned to watch, and the salesman's earlier arrogance evaporated completely. He tried to regain control, but it was too late. The room had noticed something far more important than who was in charge. It had noticed the man's humility, his patience, and the way he treated everyone around him with respect. The man continued walking around the lot after the photo, stopping occasionally to ask the young mechanic a simple question about a car's mileage or maintenance history. His questions were thoughtful, polite, and genuine. He wasn't asking to show off, he wasn't trying to prove himself, and he wasn't looking for special treatment. He was simply being himself, calmly, without pretense. The salesman, meanwhile, was struggling to recover. His earlier comments, meant to belittle, now made him look foolish. Customers whispered among themselves, shaking their heads at how badly he had misjudged the situation. Even his own colleagues were watching with a mix of surprise and amusement. The confidence he had relied on for so long was gone, replaced with an awkward nervousness. The man finally paused at a mid-sized sedan, one that looked well-kept but simple. He crouched down to inspect the tires, ran his hand along the interior, and glanced at the engine. Every action was careful, methodical, and patient. There was no rush, no showiness, just quiet attention to detail. By now, it was clear to everyone in the dealership that the man wasn't here for drama or attention. He wasn't here to be recognized or praised. He was here to find the right car, to make a thoughtful choice, and to treat everyone and everything around him with respect. The young mechanic, who had been quietly observing from a distance, finally gathered the courage to step forward. "Sir," he said softly, trying not to sound nervous, "I can help you with that one. I know its history and can answer any questions you have." The man smiled warmly at him. "Thank you," he said. "I'd appreciate that." It was a simple exchange, but it carried a weight that the salesman couldn't understand. Here was someone famous, yet he was treating a young employee with genuine respect and attention. Something the salesman had never considered. The salesman stood back, feeling a strange mix of frustration and embarrassment. He had tried to assert control through judgment and condescension, but the calm presence of the man had completely undone him. Every small act of patience and kindness made the salesman's previous behavior look petty and small. The man continued speaking quietly with the young mechanic, asking thoughtful questions and listening carefully to the answers. He was polite, humble, and engaged, treating the mechanic as an equal rather than someone beneath him. It was a striking contrast to the salesman's earlier behavior, and everyone in the dealership noticed that by the time the man finally moved on to look at another car, the entire atmosphere had shifted. Customers whispered about his calm demeanor, staff members exchanged glances, and the salesman, once confident and mocking, now fumbled for words. No one had ever seen such a quiet, patient, and respectful approach command so much attention. The day, which had started like any other, was now turning into a story that everyone would remember. Not because of drama or shouting, but because of the quiet strength, humility, and kindness of one man who refused to be shaken by arrogance. The air in the dealership was thick with quiet tension. The salesman, who had been arrogant and dismissive earlier, now felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had thought this would be a simple day, an ordinary routine, but everything had changed the moment the family had recognized the man in the plain jacket. The once confident smirk that had defined him all morning had disappeared. Now he stood frozen, uncertain of what to do next. The man, meanwhile, continued calmly examining cars. He moved slowly, intentionally, taking the time to inspect the interiors, open doors, and peek under the hood. His movements were quiet, yet every action seemed to hold a certain authority, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that naturally draws it. Customers who had been browsing quietly began to pay attention. Some whispered to each other, some simply watched, curious and slightly in awe. The young mechanic, who had been nervously assisting him with one of the mid-sized sedans, finally found his voice. "Sir," he said softly, trying not to sound too excited, "I can answer any questions about this car. I've worked on it myself, and I know all its history." The man turned to him with a warm, sincere smile. "Thank you. I'd really appreciate that," he said. His tone was calm, genuine, and patient. He didn't rush the mechanic, and he didn't make him feel small or nervous, even though the young man had recognized him instantly. The contrast between the man's humility and the salesman's earlier arrogance was stark, and it did not go unnoticed by anyone present. Suddenly, a group of customers walking through the lot paused. Some of them had recognized him earlier, some hadn't. But when they saw the calm way he interacted with everyone's staff, families, and even other customers, they began whispering among themselves. "That's him, isn't it?" one said, pointing quietly. "Yes, that's him," another replied. "And he's just so normal, so kind." The salesman, noticing the growing attention, tried to regain control. He straightened his posture, cleared his throat, and stepped closer. "Sir, maybe you'd like to look at our newer models," he said, attempting to sound helpful and professional, though the forced tone betrayed his unease. "They're better quality, more reliable, and, well, just much more impressive." The man looked at him politely but said nothing for a moment. Then he spoke, still calm and collected. "I appreciate your suggestion. I'll take a look in a moment. Right now, I'm trying to understand what's already here. I want to make an informed choice." His words were simple, yet they carried a subtle power. There was no anger, no criticism, just quiet confidence. The room seemed to hold its breath. Customers and staff alike felt the shift. The salesman, who had been used to controlling every interaction, was now visibly flustered. He had tried to dominate with attitude, but the man's composure left him feeling small and ineffectual. Every gesture, every word, reminded the salesman that he was no longer in charge. Meanwhile, the man returned to the sedan he had been inspecting with the mechanic. He crouched down, ran his hand over the tires, checked the alignment, and even asked a few detailed questions about the engine. The mechanic answered patiently, explaining everything clearly. The man listened attentively, nodded occasionally, and asked follow-up questions not to show off, but simply because he genuinely wanted to understand. A few more families entered the dealership, and the moment they recognized him, their reactions were almost instantaneous. Children whispered excitedly to their parents, and parents approached him politely, asking for photos. The man smiled warmly at everyone, crouching slightly so the children could stand in front of him. patiently letting them take pictures without making it feel rushed or awkward. He did not ask for attention, he did not demand respect, yet everyone in the room could feel it. The salesman watched in disbelief. His earlier attempts at mockery and control had completely backfired. The calm and kindness of this man had turned the situation completely, and the people around him were now more focused on admiration than on buying cars. He opened his mouth to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. He had nothing to say that could restore the authority he had so confidently displayed earlier. The man, after spending some time with the mechanic, walked slowly toward another section of the lot. He paused occasionally, inspecting cars carefully, opening doors, leaning down to check engines. Every movement was deliberate and thoughtful. Customers who had been browsing silently began to follow, just to watch. There was something magnetic about the way he carried himself, a quiet energy that drew attention without demanding it. The young mechanic couldn't believe his luck. Not only was he helping someone he had admired for years, but he was also experiencing firsthand the genuine humility and kindness of this person. He felt proud to answer questions, proud to show his knowledge, and quietly inspired by the way the man treated everyone with respect. Suddenly, a coworker approached the salesman. Do you know who he is?" she asked quietly, trying not to draw attention. The salesman's face went pale. "Yes, I know," he muttered under his breath. "I can't believe I didn't recognize him earlier." His tone was a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. He had spent all morning acting arrogantly toward someone famous without even knowing it. The man, oblivious to the internal turmoil of the salesman, continued calmly. He moved to a slightly older SUV parked near the edge of the lot. He opened the driver's side door, glanced inside, and checked the rearview mirrors. He leaned down to inspect the engine and then got back out to examine the tires. Every action was measured, careful, and respectful. It was clear that he was focused on understanding the cars, not on making a scene or proving anything. The salesman, now flustered, tried to regain some control. "Sir, we have some premium models that might suit your needs better," he said, forcing a smile, but the man simply nodded politely. "Thank you, I'll think about it. Right now, I want to focus on what's already here," he said. There was no trace of sarcasm or confrontation in his voice, just calm clarity. By now, almost everyone in the dealership had noticed the exchange. Customers whispered, staff exchanged glances, and the young mechanic felt a sense of pride. Here was someone famous, yet entirely human, treating everyone with dignity and respect. It was a lesson in humility that everyone present could feel. The man then paused near a small, simple sedan that was easy to overlook. He crouched down, checked the tires, and carefully opened the hood. He inspected the engine with quiet attention, occasionally asking the mechanic a thoughtful question. His questions were simple, practical, and genuine, focused entirely on understanding the car, not on status or recognition. As he stood back, a few customers quietly approached, whispering to each other. "I can't believe how calm he is," one said. "And kind," added another. "He doesn't act like a celebrity at all." The room seemed to hum with a quiet admiration, and even the salesman couldn't deny it. Finally, the man turned to the young mechanic. "Thank you for your help," he said with a sincere smile. "I really appreciate your honesty and guidance. It means more than you might realize." The mechanic, almost speechless, nodded quickly. He had never been thanked in such a genuine way, and he felt a warmth spread through him. The salesman, now fully aware of the public attention and his own misjudgment, tried to intervene, but it was too late. The energy in the dealership had shifted completely. People were focused not on sales, but on the quiet, respectful strength of this man who had walked in like any other customer but had left an unforgettable impression. By the time he moved on to look at another car, the man's presence had transformed the dealership. He had shown patience, humility, and respect in a situation where others might have acted arrogantly or demanded attention. And yet, he did it all quietly, naturally, without any need for recognition. The salesman watched helplessly as the man continued calmly inspecting vehicles. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that true respect and influence didn't come from arrogance or attitude. It came from kindness, patience, and genuine engagement with people. As the man prepared to leave that section of the lot, the young mechanic followed to answer any further questions. "Thank you again," he said quietly, "for treating me like a person, not just someone who works here." The man smiled warmly. "Of course," he said softly. "Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are or what they do. That's more important than any car, any sale, or any reputation." For a moment, everyone in the dealership paused, reflecting on those words. They were simple, yet profound. The calm, humble authority of this man had transformed the energy in the room completely. The arrogance that had dominated earlier had vanished, replaced with quiet admiration and respect for someone who didn't need to show off to command it. The day, which had started like any other, was no longer ordinary. It was now a day that everyone present would remember, not because of a sale, not because of fame, but because of a quiet demonstration of humility, patience, and genuine human kindness. The dealership had grown unusually quiet, but not in the usual way. It wasn't silence from boredom or routine. It was the kind of quiet that comes when everyone notices something important happening right in front of them. The man in the simple jacket had become the center of attention, not because he demanded it, but because of how calm and respectful he carried himself. Customers who had been walking around browsing cars were now standing quietly, watching him inspect each vehicle with care. Even the chatter of the staff had mostly died down. The young mechanic had followed him around for the past several minutes, answering his thoughtful questions about each car. The mechanic's nervousness had slowly faded, replaced by a sense of pride. Here was someone famous, yet they treated him like an equal, listening patiently, valuing his knowledge, and asking questions that showed genuine interest. The young mechanic felt a surge of respect and motivation. Meanwhile, the salesman was fumbling. His earlier confidence was completely gone. Every time he tried to speak, his words stumbled and fell flat. He had thought he could control the situation through arrogance and judgment, but that plan had failed entirely. He watched helplessly as the man continued moving through the lot, quietly evaluating each car, interacting with the mechanic, and occasionally nodding to other staff with a polite smile. The atmosphere in the dealership had shifted completely, and he could feel it. The man finally stopped at a simple mid-sized sedan, the kind of car most people overlooked. He crouched down carefully, examined the tires, and gently ran his fingers along the smooth metal of the car's exterior. Then he opened the hood and inspected the engine, asking the mechanic a few thoughtful questions about its maintenance history and overall condition. The mechanic explained patiently, giving honest answers and feeling more confident with each response. After a few minutes, the man stepped back, wiped his hands, and turned to the mechanic. "I really appreciate your help," he said warmly. "You've been honest and straightforward, and that matters more than anything else. Thank you for taking the time to explain everything so clearly." The young mechanic blinked, a little surprised. "It's my job, sir." "But thank you for saying that," he replied quietly, feeling proud and encouraged. He had never expected to be treated with such genuine respect by someone so well-known, someone so famous, yet so humble. At that moment, the manager of the dealership arrived. He had been alerted to the situation after noticing the growing crowd of customers gathered around, whispering excitedly. When he saw the man in the jacket interacting quietly with the young mechanic, his jaw dropped. He had recognized the man immediately and realized that the situation required careful handling. "Sir," the manager said, stepping forward with a mix of urgency and formality, "please let me know if there's anything you need. I can show you our premium selection, provide any details, and make sure your experience here is top priority." The man smiled politely, but his response was measured and calm. "Thank you, but I'm fine for now. I'm just looking at a few cars and trying to understand what's already here. I'll make my decision once I've had a chance to think carefully." His words were gentle yet firm. There was no arrogance, no demand for special treatment. Yet the manager instantly understood that this man's quiet confidence carried far more authority than anything he could offer. The salesman, who had been standing to the side, tried once again to regain control. "Sir, we do have some cars that are more luxurious, more impressive," he said, his tone forced and nervous. They're new arrivals, high quality, and I think you'd really like them. The man looked at him calmly and shook his head gently. I appreciate that, he said softly. But I'm more interested in finding something practical and reliable, something that suits my needs rather than just appearances. That's what really matters. The room seemed to shift even more as the words sank in. Customers watching quietly exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. Even the manager seemed to pause, reflecting on the simplicity and wisdom of the statement. The salesman, on the other hand, swallowed nervously. Realizing again that his usual tactics were completely useless here, the man returned to the mechanic. Kneeling slightly to get a closer look at the sedan he had been inspecting, he asked a few more detailed questions, showing a genuine interest in learning the car's history, performance, and maintenance needs. He listened attentively, nodding occasionally, never interrupting or showing impatience. Each question was practical, thoughtful, and respectful. The young mechanic found himself speaking more confidently than ever before. He explained details about the car's engine, how it had been maintained, and what to expect in terms of reliability. The man listened carefully, asking follow-up questions when necessary, and even complimented the mechanic on his knowledge and honesty. You've been very thorough, he said with a warm smile. It's clear you care about your work, and that's something rare. Meanwhile, the salesman tried one last tactic. He motioned toward a row of shiny new models near the front of the dealership. Sir, these are our newest arrivals. They have all the features you could want. You'd be missing out if you didn't consider them, he said. Forcing a tone of excitement, the man glanced briefly at the cars but shook his head politely. Thank you, but I really want something simple and reliable. Something I can use every day without worrying about unnecessary extras. That's what makes the most sense for me. The statement drew quiet approval from the crowd. Customers whispered among themselves, and the manager nodded, realizing that the man's approach to life extended even to buying a car. There was no showiness, no ego, no need to impress, just thoughtful, practical choices guided by common sense and humility. The young mechanic couldn't help but smile. He had watched countless famous people on screens, read countless stories, and yet nothing compared to seeing this person's character firsthand. Here was someone who had every reason to act differently, to demand attention and to expect special treatment, and yet he didn't. He simply treated everyone with respect, listened carefully, and acted with calm thoughtfulness. The man finally walked around the car one last time, carefully closing the hood and straightening his posture. He looked at the mechanic with genuine appreciation. Thank you again for all your help. You've been honest, kind, and patient, and that's more valuable than anything else today, he said. The young mechanic felt a rush of pride and gratitude. It's been an honor, sir, he replied quietly. Thank you for being so genuine. The manager, seeing how well the interaction had gone, approached the man cautiously. Sir, if you'd like, I can provide full details on any car you're interested in. Arrange test drives or offer any assistance you need, he said. Trying to balance professionalism with respect, the man nodded politely. I appreciate that, he said, but I'm already getting the information I need. I'm happy to continue working with this mechanic. He's been very helpful and honest, and that's what matters most to me. The room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone noticed the contrast between the man's calm authority and the earlier arrogance of the salesman. It wasn't loud or forceful, it was quiet, thoughtful, and deeply human. People around him felt drawn to the simplicity and honesty of his actions, realizing that true respect doesn't come from power or wealth, but from humility, patience, and genuine care for others. Even the salesman, who had spent the morning mocking the man, felt a pang of shame. He realized how small and petty his behavior had been, especially in comparison to the quiet strength and kindness the man displayed. He tried to step forward, but the words felt meaningless. The lesson had already been taught, not with anger or confrontation, but with calm, quiet integrity. The man moved back to the mid-sized sedan, crouching again to double-check a few details. He ran his hand lightly along the tires, glanced at the interior, and nodded thoughtfully. This car seems perfect for what I need, he said finally, turning to the young mechanic. I think I've made my choice. Thank you again for your patience and honesty. It's rare to see that these days. The young mechanic nodded, barely able to contain his excitement. It's been my pleasure, he said softly. I'm glad I could help. The manager approached once more, now more respectful and humble. Sir, if there's anything you need, any further assistance, just let me know. I want to make sure your experience is exceptional, he said. The man smiled gently. Thank you. Just one thing, he said quietly. Please remember to treat every customer the way you treated me today. Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are or how they look. That's far more important than a sale or a reputation. The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. Customers and staff alike paused to reflect on them. The room was filled with quiet admiration. It was clear that this was more than a car purchase. It was a lesson in humility, kindness, and respect that everyone present would remember. By the time the man moved toward the exit, the atmosphere in the dealership had completely transformed. The arrogance that had dominated earlier had vanished, replaced with quiet respect and a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. Even the salesman, humbled by the experience, quietly reflected on his behavior and the lesson he had just witnessed. The young mechanic walked alongside the man for a few steps, smiling quietly. Thank you again, he said. I'll never forget. The man had made his choice, a simple, practical car that suited his needs perfectly. But even as he was preparing to leave, the energy in the dealership hadn't faded. Customers, staff, and even the once arrogant salesman were still quietly reflecting on what had happened. This wasn't just about a car sale anymore. It had become a lesson in humility, patience, and respect. The young mechanic who had assisted him walked alongside him, carrying the car documents and offering to explain anything further. His face was a mixture of pride, awe, and excitement. He could hardly believe what had just happened. Not only had he helped someone famous, but he had also witnessed firsthand the incredible way this person treated everyone with kindness and respect. Thank you again for everything, the mechanic said quietly. I've never seen someone act with so much humility. It's inspiring. The man smiled warmly. I'm glad. You've been honest and patient, and that's all I could ask for. People often judge too quickly or expect too much from others. But respect and patience make all the difference. His voice was soft but carried weight. As if each word mattered deeply, the manager, standing nearby, finally found the courage to speak. Sir, I want to apologize for how you were treated earlier. It was wrong, and it won't happen again. I can assure you we'll take this as a lesson. The man nodded calmly. Thank you for saying that. I believe everyone can improve if they remember to treat each person with dignity. That's far more important than a single sale or even a reputation. The salesman, who had been humiliated earlier, lowered his head. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The calm composure of the man and the quiet way he had handled the situation made any words of excuse or justification meaningless. He had been taught a lesson, not through confrontation, but through patient, quiet dignity. Outside the dealership, people were starting to notice. A few customers had taken out their phones to capture the moment, not for fame, but simply because they were witnessing something remarkable. The man had been treated like an ordinary customer, yet his presence, patience, and humility had transformed an entire room. People whispered excitedly among themselves, amazed by how calm, kind, and human he was. The man approached the car he had chosen and carefully inspected it one last time. He ran his hand along the hood, checking the tires, and opened the doors to make sure everything was in order. Then he turned to the young mechanic. I think this is the one, he said simply. Thank you again for your guidance and honesty. You've been patient, thorough, and respectful. That matters more than anything else here today. The mechanic could hardly speak. He nodded, feeling both proud and deeply moved. It's my pleasure, sir. Thank you for being so genuine. The man smiled, quietly humble. Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are. That's something we should all remember. The manager stepped forward again, trying to maintain professionalism, but also showing sincere admiration. Sir, please allow me to process everything. I want to ensure your experience is seamless. The man nodded, stepping aside to let the paperwork be prepared. He didn't demand special treatment, didn't request a VIP lane or attention from the staff. He simply allowed the process to move forward naturally, quietly demonstrating patience and humility once more. As the paperwork was being processed, several customers who had been observing the interaction began talking quietly among themselves. "I can't believe how calm and kind he is," one whispered. "He's famous, but he doesn't act like it. He treats people with respect." Another nodded. "Yes, that's what makes it remarkable. He didn't need to make a scene. He just treated everyone like a human being. That's the lesson we all need to learn." By now, the story of what had happened in the dealership was spreading quickly. People who had witnessed the interaction began sharing their experiences online. Short videos and photos of the man, quietly inspecting cars and treating the staff with genuine respect, started circulating. Within hours, the story went viral. People everywhere were praising his humility, patience, and the way he treated everyone, staff and customers alike, with dignity. Inside the dealership, the manager addressed the staff quietly. "Everyone, this is a reminder that every customer deserves respect. No matter who walks through the door, it's our behavior that matters. Today has been a lesson for all of us." The salesman, still ashamed, nodded slowly. He had been humbled, not by loud confrontation, but by quiet dignity. He realized that arrogance and judgment could never command the respect that patience, humility, and genuine care could. The young mechanic walked alongside the man one last time as he prepared to leave. "I just want to say again, thank you," he said softly. "I'll never forget this." The man smiled warmly. "Neither will I, and remember, it's the little things, respect, patience, kindness, that really make a difference in the world. Every person we meet deserves that." He opened the car door, got in, and started the engine. The sound was soft but confident. As he drove away from the dealership, there was a quiet sense of awe among everyone watching. It wasn't just that a famous person had visited, it was that the visit had reminded everyone of something more important than cars or sales. It was about human decency, respect, and patience. After he left, the young mechanic returned to the lot, smiling quietly. He felt inspired, motivated, and proud to have been part of something so genuine. He knew that the lesson he had learned today would stay with him forever. The manager gathered the staff for a quick meeting. "Today wasn't just about selling cars," he said. "It was about how we treat people. Let's remember this lesson. Respect and patience go further than arrogance or attitude ever could." We've seen it firsthand. Even the customers who had been watching nodded quietly. They had come to the dealership expecting an ordinary experience, maybe a car purchase or a casual browse. But instead, they witnessed a quiet, powerful lesson in humility and respect. The story quickly spread beyond the dealership, reaching social media, news outlets, and ordinary people who were inspired by the calm, genuine way the man had conducted himself. In the following days, the dealership noticed changes. Staff were more patient, customers were treated with more care, and the atmosphere became warmer and more welcoming. The salesman, who had been embarrassed and humbled, worked hard to change his behavior. Learning from the example he had seen, the young mechanic became a minor local celebrity himself, not for fame, but for his role in assisting someone who had demonstrated what it truly meant to be kind and humble. People came to the dealership, curious to meet the mechanic who had been part of the story. Meanwhile, the viral story of the man in the simple jacket spread around the world. People shared it not for gossip, but because it was a reminder of the simple truth: respect, patience, and humility matter far more than appearances, wealth, or status. Millions were inspired by the way he had treated everyone, from the young mechanic to the manager, and even the salesman who had tried to humiliate him. The man, however, remained calm, quiet, and humble. He didn't seek attention or recognition. He had simply conducted himself with patience, dignity, and genuine care. That was the lesson, and that was what had resonated with so many people. By the end of the day, the dealership was filled with a new energy. Customers and staff alike felt inspired, and the story of what had happened would be remembered for years. It wasn't a story of wealth, power, or fame. It was a story of human kindness, humility, and respect, the kind that leaves a lasting impact. Even weeks later, the young mechanic still thought about that day. He remembered the calm patience, the thoughtful questions, the quiet respect, and the simple wisdom of treating everyone with dignity. It had changed the way he approached his work, his interactions with others, and even his perspective on life. The story had gone viral for a reason. People everywhere needed the reminder that no matter who we are, how much money we have, or what status we hold, kindness, humility, and respect always matter most. And one simple visit to a small car dealership had reminded the world of that truth in the most quiet, yet unforgettable way. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows over the dealership lot, the cars gleamed softly in the fading light. But it wasn't the cars that shone brightest, it was the lesson left behind by one man, humble, kind, and patient, who had shown the world that true respect is earned not by power or wealth, but by genuine human decency.